Once we're satisfied with the shape, we can begin by creating our first layer clone. So we're going to select the patterns that we created with our transform pattern tool, right click, and select layer clone over, which basically creates identical patterns that are sewn over the shape that we already have. Now for these new patterns, for this new layer clone, we're going to create a new fabric under the object browser. So we're going to click add right here, and we're going to rename it to first layer. And the only thing that we'll be changing is the physical property preset. We're going to access the drop-down menu once more, and we're going to choose the D-rib knit feature. Now this material is very soft because I want this layer clone to be wrapping around our avatar very tightly. So let's just apply the material by dragging and dropping it. There we go. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to reduce the particle distance. So in the property editor under simulation properties, we're going to reduce the particle distance to 10 because we would really like to bring out more details. And next we're going to unfreeze all of the patterns except for the front one. So right click and unfreeze all of them except for the front. Now before I start simulating, I'm also going to select my edit sewing tool. Now as you can see, the layer clone we just created is connected with the avatar with stitches, and not only are all of the lines connected, but also all of the internal lines, including the internal circles, are connected to each other. Now because I don't want these lines to be so pronounced, I'm just going to delete the seam lines for the internal lines, but I'm going to leave the seam lines for the internal circles. So just delete the seam lines right here. Okay, now we can begin by simulating. So let's press spacebar. Now at first glance, nothing has really changed, but we're going to quickly change it by selecting all of the patterns. And we're going to manipulate the pressure setting again. And this time we're going to go above 0 and just make it greater. So to 20 or 21 or something like that. And as you can see, this is why I did not want to unfreeze the front pattern, because if it were to be unfreezed, then everything would look too bloated. But of course I want this side to be nice and smooth. I just wanted to achieve this effect in the back. Okay, once we're done with that, we can now freeze all of the patterns. So right click and freeze. Now we're going to be creating another layer clone. So right click and layer clone over once more. And for this clone, we'll also be creating a separate piece of fabric. So just click add. And we're going to rename this one to second layer. And we're going to change the material to D-leather. Now the reason why I chose D-leather is because it's a stiff material. It's very believable because since most purses are made out of leather, but it also generates quite a lot of wrinkles to give that interesting effect. So let's drag and drop the newly made material to our new layer clone. We're also going to lower the particle distance even more. So let's go from 10 to 8. And we're also going to bump up the add thickness collision setting. So it's now set to 2.5 and we're going to set it to 5. Now basically what this setting does is it prevents this top layer clone to interfere with all of the bottoms. And let's not forget to access the edit sewing tool and once more delete the seam lines for the internal lines, because like I said, I simply don't like the effect that they produce. And I'm also going to enlarge this layer clone a bit. So it's going to be a bit bigger than the others. Let's right click and unfreeze it. And let's simulate. Oops, and I forgot to freeze the front part, so let's go back with Control and Z. And let's freeze the front side. So right click and freeze, and let's simulate it now. Alright, now let's select all of the patterns from our layer clone, and we're also going to play with the shrinkage, weft, and warp a bit. So while we're under simulation mode, let's simply enlarge it to 105. So we get these nice wrinkles overall. Maybe that's a bit too much actually. So let's go with 103. Now I'm also going to take my Edit Pattern tool and select these internal lines, all of them by using Shift. And we're also going to play with the fold angle and strength of the internal lines. So I'm going to enlarge the fold strength. And let's just zoom in so we'll see the effect a bit more. And now, depending on the fold angle, we can make the seam lines more pronounced. And I actually see that we will need to exaggerate our settings even more. So let's select the internal lines again, but this time making the fold angle smaller to make the seam lines stick out. There we go. Alright, and we're almost done with our purse. We just need a few adjustments. We're actually going to be adding a flap right here that's going to close off with a button, which we will do in our next clip.